Welcome to day 3 of Autumn Painting Challenge. We have majority of subjects painted, and during today I will paint 1, 2, 3 leaves, 2 brown maple leaves on top of mushroom, and 1 little birch tree yellowish leaf. These leaves, if we generally look, they are brown, but compared to the beautiful brown surface of the mushroom, they look more like golden, more yellowish, even more reddish brown color. After painting this maple leaf, I have a lot of reds on my palette, so I'm not washing away. These watercolors still can be used, and if you have leftovers of watercolors on your palettes, don't wash. You can cover with plastic wrap and use it later. Our later came quite fast, so I will adding a little bit of water to awaken beautifully, adding a little bit of Indian yellow, a little bit more, and I will add ultramarine blue to make it more browner. Testing on a piece of paper. And I definitely want to get these leaves brown, different than this mushroom had brown. And it's important. This composition has a lot of color tones, and we can't use same. And that's why I'm testing and checking. This one is good. I want to also mix something darker, so I'm awakening this red. A little bit more water. For this one, I'm taking more Indian yellow. I want to add now perlin violet to give a little bit of violet hint. And now ultramarine blue. It's more violet. Checking. And it's beautiful. Beautiful, just like shadow. Then the second maple leaf is even more to the red and yellow. So I have the third one here, adding more of Indian yellow, a little bit more. And for this one, I will take perlin green. Testing. No, not quite there. I will leave this for this one. So I want to start from the beginning, taking lemon yellow. Let's take perlin maroon to make it more golden. More lemon yellow. And more perlin maroon. And now to this mix ultramarine blue. A little touch of ultramarine blue. And now as I look in the reference, I want to add more of alizarin crimson, more brighter red color. Testing. Closer, much closer. Let's start and see how it will look from there. Zooming in closer, and this is the area that we need to paint. Be sure that your water is clean after mixing watercolors, starting with water, just enough so watercolors can be moved, making surface moist, but not a puddle of water. And I'm taking this mix, applying it everywhere transparently. Inner part will become darker, but we have beautiful curved outer part, which is very light. carefully with the tip of the brush. You can use smaller brush to be sure that you are staying in the inner part of the outline. And pushing watercolors. Here we have a little tip curved, leaving it there. Pushing watercolors, painting. Careful, look into the reference photo if you are getting correctly all lines. Not overpainting somewhere further than required. My leaf is touching, also this part is touching mushroom surface. In the reference, I see that this not what is happening there. That's okay to have some little adjustments. That's not a big problem. And now while the surface is moist, I will apply a little bit more in the inner part, which areas are darker. But carefully, if your surface is too wet, then your watercolors will go quickly into the area where it shouldn't go. Be sure that you have quite dry already area. As I'm not using too much water, my surface dries pretty quickly and I don't need to sit and physically wait for a long time. If you need to still wait, you can pause the video and continue after surface has dried completely. Carefully here, constantly checking with reference if I'm on the right track. I will also leave a very fine line for the stem, because I see that the stem in this part from one side is lighter. And then we have this golden color going to this little spike of maple leaf. Like this. So we have outer part and inner part, and then I will also add this darker color here where we see that there's a darker area. Washing brush and smoothing edge of applied watercolor, so I have smooth transition like this. Taking finer tip brush, using some areas that we need, like this little corner is darker. There's this like little twisted area, and we have a little bit of darkness here, and this little tip is also slightly darker. And then we have here a little curved piece of the leaf, and careful around stem. Like this. We have some darker spots and shadows. Also, this part, as we painted previously, has lots of texture, so your layers shouldn't be super smooth. Consider applying different brush strokes, different spots to get the texture of old leaf that has fallen and starting to get browner and darker and older. Then I have here darkness. a little bit here, washing my brush and smoothing. Now I see that I need a little bit more of yellow, so I'm taking lemon yellow and apply a little bit more on the inner part, like a glaze here and there. I see that, and these glazes of clean colors can be added while you paint, that you feel that maybe reference looks a little bit more to the red side. You apply a glaze of red pigment. Here I see that my leaf is going too much to the cooler side of brown, and in reference it's more warmer brown. So to make it warmer, glaze of yellow will do the thing. A little bit more of color, details. There's shadow. And here we have some textured spots and darker shadow area. And this part, if I compare a reference photo leaf with the mushroom head, then this part is darker. So I will be adding more layers here in order to get the darker intensity here, contrast. But as we are talking about this, we are not achieving that with 1 or 2 or even 5 layers. More layers are required to get something dark. We also can add veins. Beauty of old fallen veins and leaves is that veins are brown and majority of time darker, so you just need to get a very fine line of the dark vein. If the leaf is alive, then veins are mostly lighter, and that's giving quite a headache for botanical artists to get a leaf realistic. But with autumn leaves, it's such a pleasure to paint them because we don't need to get worried about veins. Here, adding a little longer spike here, making some alterations that are not in a reference photo, and that's also acceptable. If you're not changing entirely your subject that you're working on, but maybe making it more precise or more interesting, that is completely okay. Then we need a little bit of shadow here to separate this overlapping and shadow. The more attention is added, the more realistic is going to look. A little darker spot in the middle that we see, and more to this side. Smoothing. Adding more. checking constantly what is happening in the reference. This piece goes way darker. Great attention, constantly checking the reference and super fine details to make this leaf realistic. Another layer to build contrast in the shadow. Carefully pushing. And also in the reference photo, there's no shadow on this part because leaf is slightly above the mushroom. In my painting it's not, so I will also add shadow there because my leaf is touching surface of the mushroom, meaning there should be shadow. More spots, more shadows, separating piece from another with a shadow, not with the outline. Smoothing with clean brush. Also, this area needs a little bit of shadow because this is curve, meaning there should be shadow as well. Tonal values are making something realistic. So this one, slightly also different than in reference photo. Smoothing. More veins. I need more veins. Some need to go darker in order for them to be visible. This little curve is darker. This little spike can go a little bit darker. Before applying veins, try maybe on a different piece of paper to practice super fine lines for the veins. The veins should be crisp and very thin. Making curves more visible, building contrast, adding spots. Some darker area right where the leaf is touching mushroom. That is the darkest place. I need to beat the intensity between mushroom and leaf. Now they are reached the stage where they're very close to each other, but I need more. There's a little bit, one little brush stroke went into the stem, but with clean and dry brush, quickly while the paint isn't dried, I can remove that little mistake. Adding another transparent layer of watercolors. This area needs a little bit more of color. Noticed another interesting vein going here. You can add a little bit more. And here. And a little bit more here. Slowly. Now I need to add very fine dark line to the stem, which is darker on the right side, and then it's lighter on the inner side. A very fine line of darker color, and this tip is dark. Slowly, carefully. And then lighter color that we have on the palette, adding to the upper part of this stem. With stems, remember I told you, be extra careful to make it super thin. The older leaf, the thinner stem. Another darker line on the right side. Like this. Thin stem makes more natural and realistic look. And then the finishing part of the stem, where it goes inside the leaf, it can go way darker to create the depth and darkness there. A little bit more color here, of orangey, and here. We can add now another layer of contrast to the leaf to separate it from the mushroom. Like this. It goes a little bit higher. With drier brush, I can add more textured spots. Like this. And now we can proceed to the next one. Just little small details. Second maple leaf that is on the second mushroom. In reference photo I can see that this is brown color, but it's more closer to the red and yellow. And it's slightly different than this one, and definitely different than mushroom brown. And as we mixed this color, which I see the closest, And I want to also add separately lemon yellow to my palette. And for the first layer in the inner part, I want to apply lemon yellow there as well. No, not to the inner part, but to the outer part. That is where it's much warmer. Starting with water. Carefully, we have beautiful thin spikes. So starting with the mix. Slowly and accurately with spikes. And in the reference photo, leaf is slightly above mushroom, but mine is on top of the mushroom, precisely. Carefully with painting and applying. And if you are painting and you feel that surface became too dry, again, wash your brush and reapply moisture so that the surface is moist, no puddles, as you can see. And for this inner part, I'm taking yellow as the first layer. And also main mix. Now everything is quite the same. Careful with these spikes. And while the surface is still moist, we need to define where are darks and where are lights. Don't rush this stage. Paint very accurately, especially careful with outlines not to get out of them. Here my yellow is pushing away color, so I can add a little bit more. No worries about that. Now in some areas I need more darker, like this little curve here is darker. Also, all this part is way darker. This beautiful curved part of the maple leaf is beautiful. And the upper part is darker. I need to wait till layer gets dry because then I'm just pushing watercolors from one side to another. And while this is drying, we can add layer to this little birch tree leaf. And for that, I have a leftover of this color that we used for mushrooms. I will add there on the side a little bit of the brown from the maple leaves that we just painted. Starting with water. It's very light. You shouldn't go dark. This is very light leaf compared to the other ones. Very light and transparent, but there are of course shadows and lights still. We need to apply just this first layer. And for this side, it's very similar to the maple leaf that is right beside it. Like this. And then there's a little bit of shadow here on the inner part. Like this. So there's darker on the further part, and then there's shadow on the inner part of the curve. Very lightly. Now this is dry now, and we can get back to it. I'm taking finer tip brush for greater precision and accuracy. Now this one here, adding more darkness to this little beautiful small curve. Then there's darkness on the upper part. Especially make those spikes really thin and crisp. And then there's a beautiful curve here. In realistic painting, it's very important. Even the smallest details are important, so don't underestimate little tips, spikes, curves, folds. Everything is helping get this realistic result. And then this one, there's darker spike slightly there. And then also upper part. And a little spike that goes there. I made them slightly longer to make them more eye-appealing for viewer. I'm not changing the subject, but I'm making them more artistic, more beautiful. That's always welcome when you are painting. That's how you also can make it look different rather than just a photo. Of course, we can add now Photoshop and change it as well, but painting is your artistic expression, and you can alter in order to make it more beautiful, more aesthetic. And there's a visible little curve on the lower part. Pause the video, zoom in closer reference photo, and take a closer look. Do you see what I'm talking about? Do you see these little curves and spikes? Pay attention to details. Pay attention to little things. That makes a lot of difference. Like here, we need to separate with shadow. Here there is the inner part that is visible, those lighter. And then there's overlapping the curved part of the outer part. Darker area is on the lower part and upper part to make it look roundish. And now the layer of paper surface is completely dry, and I can add more crisper details, finer lines, be more precise with the outer edges. This one is also darker as it is in the shadow. Just a little bit And then this one is also slightly darker. Smoothing so there's no crisp edges. And adding another layer of watercolors. You can even add a little bit of brown from the first darker brown maple leaf, like add some details, spots. And another layer is being built to make it more contrasty, darker. Lower part needs more contrast to give their shadow. Now taking round synthetic brush, a little bit of lemon yellow with the main mix, and I will glaze over. If you added too much with clean and damp brush, you can slightly wipe it out. And I have shadow, light, shadow. Definitely need a little bit more for the shadow to make it even more darker, more intense. And with each new brush stroke and layer, the sleeve becomes more and more realistic, only with patience and layers. And we haven't even painted veins, which will give more realistic look. Now inner part. Now taking round synthetic brush, small amount of watercolors, and glaze over the inner part to give another layer, smooth a little bit of the layer that was applied before. And as I look at the reference, I see that the upper part is slightly darker. That's like in the shadow. So I'm adding another layer there, making it slightly darker and smoothing towards the lighter part. This one here is also a little piece and don't need to forget it. And these ones need to make the spike part a little bit longer. Like this. And more watercolors here. Now we can move back to this one. Another layer to the inner part. And to the outer part as well. There's a little bit darker outer area. And in the middle we have brown middle part where veins are coming out. Taking brown watercolor mix for vein, just really thin. Try to make them as thin as possible. There's middle vein, a little bit more darkness in the back, in the front, and slowly giving more realistic touch. The outer part is darker. Some spots you can add, like take a little bit darker mix and add a little bit of some stippling with the brush to create a little bit of texture here and there. And we can even add a little bit more to the mushroom to enhance shadow. More shadow. A little bit more. Like this. And now taking 𝗝𝗏𝗏 𝗏𝗏𝗏, a little bit more with the leftover of some brown, and rolling my finer tip brush to get a very fine tip, removing excess amount. And let's add those crispy looking veins. Again, be sure that your veins are super thin. First, adding major veins. Oh, there's a little bit of still wet area. Be sure that your surface is dry. And your veins should be really, really small and fine, and the crisper, the better. And then there's a little those secondary veins coming out. Then there's a curved vein over here. Look at the reference and follow the direction that you see there. They are coming out of the curve and going up. And veins do make the difference right now. So we are adding them super fine and thin, making even the first try of the veins can be very, very thin, and then if you are happy with the result, you can make them stronger with next layer. Another one here. Slowly, another one, making them super crisp and fine. Now I can see that I even can make them slightly thicker, especially thicker and darker at the base. Where are they in the shadow? Like this. And then there's lots of little veins that you can add or not, that's up to you. Just making little details and try to be as thin as possible. Now this part is dry and I can add finer veins here as well. Slowly, don't need to rush. And it feels like I'm painting with the last hair on the brush. That's how thin they should be in order to look realistic and natural. And then I will have this 𝗲𝗏𝗀𝗀 violet with a little touch of brown. We can also add stem. That is dark and fine and crisp. Washing brush and smoothing this line towards a lighter part, just to be sure that it's super thin. If needed, you can add more. And at the base, the part of the vein is slightly thicker. Adding more. Also add some vein on this little curve as well. Can add details to some areas where we see that are darker spots using same 𝗲𝗏𝗀𝗀 violet, but be careful with 𝗲𝗏𝗀𝗀 violet. It's very dark and intense pigment, so you can easily overdo it. Better start lightly, and then if you see that everything works good, you can build gradually a little bit more of the contrast. And with multiple layers, we are achieving what we need. Not just with one layer, not just with fast forward, but with multiple layers. And still we can paint and build on, continue this. Adding a little bit more shadow at the lower part. And like this. I want to add a little bit more on the top here using round synthetic brush and transparent amount, gradually adding, leaving this part the lightest, and this one here as well. Like this. And let's add a little bit more here to this one and to the yellow as well. Inner part of this sleeve looks more warmer and brighter with yellow, and the back of the leaf looks more browner and with some minor little details like spots, little flaws. Also, we can add more shadow on the mushroom from this leaf. Build contrast there as well. Then I also want to add shadow here, just a little bit further. And make it even slightly darker under this one. Adding a little bit more. Like this. A little bit more shadow here. If you're painting transparently, you can go on and on, adding details and tonal values. With each new layer, you are making it more realistic, more eye-catchy. Just little details. A little bit shadow here where it is overlapping. And that's it. Next part will be this bottom part and adding more contrast and hopefully finishing up. Zooming out so you can see how the composition is developing, and there's lots of browns. It seemed like we are using same pigments: yellow, red, violet, green, and blue, but using limited amount of pigments we get huge amount of color tones, and the composition looks harmonious because we are using same pigments, only mixing different ratios to get different color tones, and everything looks beautiful. Thank you and see you tomorrow.